Sometimes the only way to truly find yourself is to disappear from the world that keeps telling you who you're supposed to be. I remember a time when I felt suffocated by expectations. Family, friends, society, everyone had an opinion on who I should be. I was constantly available, constantly present, constantly performing, but inside, I was dying. One day, I made a radical choice. I disappeared, not by vanishing off the face of the earth, but by quietly withdrawing my energy from the noise around me. I stopped answering every call. I stopped showing up where I was expected, and I gave myself the space to breathe, to think, to rebuild. That silence, that disappearance, became the birthplace of my transformation. It taught me that sometimes the best way to evolve is not to fight harder in the same environment, but to step back, reset, and return as someone unrecognizable, stronger, clearer, transformed. Number 1. Understand the power of withdrawal. There comes a point in life when the constant noise of the world becomes unbearable. Every voice louder than your own, every expectation heavier than your heart can carry, and every demand pulling you in directions that leave you fragmented and drained. Most people think withdrawal is weakness, a form of escape, but in truth, it is one of the most radical and powerful acts of self-respect you can practice. When you withdraw, you are not running away. You are choosing to reclaim your time, your energy, and your clarity from forces that have been stealing it for years. I remember vividly a chapter in my life where I was surrounded by people who seemed to know exactly who I should be. Friends wanted me to be the life of the party. Family wanted me to play the role of the obedient one. Colleagues expected me to be endlessly available. And society had a pre-drawn map of how my life should unfold. I played along for years, until one morning I woke up exhausted, not physically, but spiritually. I realized I was a character in everyone else's play, but no one had given me permission to write my own script. That's when I withdrew. I stopped explaining my absence. I stopped showing up where I was expected. I stopped filling the silence with excuses. I remember sitting in my small apartment, lights dim, phone off, and for the first time in years, I could hear the sound of my own breath. It terrified me at first, because withdrawal forces you to face the one person you've been running from, yourself. But that silence was the beginning of my transformation. In that silence, I discovered what I actually wanted, what I actually feared, and what I was willing to fight for. Withdrawal stripped me of the illusion that I needed to be constantly seen to be valuable. I began to realize that the people who were truly aligned with me respected my space, while those who only wanted to use me vanished when I was no longer available. That was my greatest lesson. Absence reveals truths that presence conceals. And slowly, as the days of my withdrawal turned into weeks, I built new habits. I started journaling my rawest thoughts. I took long walks without a phone, buzzing in my pocket. I sat in cafes and simply observed life happening instead of rushing through it. That quiet season of withdrawal gave birth to a strength in me that no applause, no approval, and no validation could ever provide. It taught me that sometimes disappearing from the crowd is not abandonment, it is rebirth. I thought of it like a seed buried in the soil. At first glance, the seed disappears. It vanishes from the surface, but in that hidden darkness, it is gathering the power to break open, to grow roots, to push through, and eventually to rise into something entirely new. That is what withdrawal does to your soul. It buries you temporarily so you can grow privately. But here's the challenge. Most people are terrified of that season. They fear the loneliness, the silence, the disconnection, and yet the very thing they fear is the medicine they need most. In my story, those who mocked my absence at first eventually saw a different version of me return, calmer, more intentional, unrecognizable to my old limitations. They asked what changed, and my answer was simple. I withdrew from you so I could return to me. That is the power of withdrawal. It is not about hiding. It is about healing. It is not about escaping life, but about learning to live it on your own terms. And once you taste the clarity that comes from withdrawing from the noise, you will never again confuse busyness with purpose or constant availability with love. You will realize that stepping back is not a loss. It is a strategy, a declaration that says, I matter enough to disappear for a while, because when I return, I will not be the same. Number 2, silence is a weapon for growth. Silence has always been misunderstood. Most people see it as emptiness, as weakness, as an absence of something. But in reality, silence is presence in its purest form. It is a weapon, a shield, and a tool for transformation, if you learn how to use it. I used to be the kind of person who explained everything: why I said no, why I didn't show up, why I chose differently. I thought if I explained myself enough, people would understand me, respect me, or at least stop questioning me. But what I learned is that explanations rarely earn you respect. Instead, they drain you of your power. I remember a season in my life where I felt cornered by constant questioning from those around me. Every time I made a choice that didn't fit their expectations, whether it was choosing solitude over a night out, choosing to invest my time in studying instead of gossiping, or choosing to say no to favors that drained me, I was bombarded with questions. Why aren't you coming? Why are you acting different? Why are you being so distant? At first, I explained myself. I poured out my reasoning, hoping someone would understand. But the truth was, most of them didn't actually want to understand me. They just wanted to control me, to keep me in the role I had always played for them. And one day, after yet another exhausting conversation, where I felt like I was defending my very right to exist the way I wanted, I simply stopped responding. I went silent. No explanation, no defense, just silence. It was uncomfortable at first. The awkwardness of not filling the air, the anxiety of being misunderstood, the guilt of not explaining myself. But slowly I discovered that silence had a strange kind of power. Silence unsettles people. It forces them to reflect on their own words. It holds up a mirror to their intentions. And most importantly, it stops the cycle of you justifying your own worth. I'll never forget one specific incident. A close friend accused me of being too distant, of changing too much, and demanded to know what was wrong with me. Normally I would have defended myself, given a long speech about needing space, about wanting to focus on my own growth. But that time, I just looked at him, smiled faintly, and said nothing. The silence stretched longer than either of us expected. He kept talking, trying to provoke me, but eventually his words trailed off. He sighed, shifted uncomfortably, and then, for the first time in years, he actually listened. That was the moment I realized, silence can accomplish what words cannot. It creates space for truth to surface. Over time, silence became my secret weapon. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped defending my boundaries. I stopped wasting energy on arguments designed to drain me. Instead, I let silence speak for me. And the surprising part, people began to respect me more. They didn't necessarily understand me, but they no longer pushed as hard against me. They sensed a strength that explanations had never conveyed. Silence taught me that growth doesn't always need to be announced. Sometimes the most powerful transformations are the ones that happen quietly, in the unseen hours, in the solitude where no one is watching. When you stop broadcasting every move, you stop inviting unnecessary resistance. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving people the tools to manipulate your path. Silence became my training ground for inner growth. It was in the quiet hours of journaling, meditating, and simply sitting with my own thoughts that I broke patterns that years of conversation had failed to change. And when I emerged from that silence, I was sharper, clearer, stronger. People could sense something had shifted, even if they couldn't name it. That's the irony of silence. It makes your growth undeniable without you ever needing to declare it. And if I could offer one lesson from my journey, it is this: stop wasting your breath trying to convince the world of who you are becoming. Let silence do the work, because silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is strategy. And when you embrace it, silence becomes the most powerful language of transformation you will ever see. Number 3. Create distance from old labels. One of the heaviest chains you will ever carry is not made of iron or steel, but of words, labels that people put on you when you were too young to resist, too fragile to fight back, or too unaware to question. You're the quiet one, you're the troublemaker, you're the responsible one, you're the failure. These labels might seem harmless in the moment, but over time they become invisible prisons, keeping you locked inside a role you never chose. I know this because for years, I lived under labels that suffocated me. Growing up, I was constantly told I was the dependable one, the one who never said no, the one who always showed up, the one who sacrificed his own desires to please others. On the surface, it sounded like a compliment. People admired my reliability, my willingness to carry the load, my constant availability. But inside, that label turned into a trap. I stopped dreaming for myself because I was too busy fulfilling what others expected of me. I stopped saying no, even when my soul was screaming for rest. And slowly, I started to lose myself. I remember one particular night that became my breaking point. A friend called me at 2 a.m., asking for help with something that could have easily waited until morning. Exhausted, drained, but still bound by the label of being the dependable one. I got up, put on my shoes, and went out to help. Halfway through that night, standing in the cold, helping with something meaningless, I felt this sudden wave of anger, not at my friend, but at myself. I realized I had let a label define me so deeply that I no longer knew where I ended and where other people's expectations began. That night when I got home, I looked in the mirror and whispered, "This is not me. This is not who I am." That was the beginning of creating distance from my old labels. It wasn't easy. People resist when you step outside the box they've put you in. They will call you selfish when you stop being endlessly available. They will call you arrogant when you start speaking up. They will call you fake when you start evolving. But their resistance is proof that you are breaking free. I started small, saying no to requests that drained me, choosing my own path even when it disappointed others, refusing to explain myself when people tried to pull me back into the old identity. Each act of defiance was like cutting a thread that had tied me down for years, and slowly the distance grew. I could feel myself stepping out of the shadow of their labels and into the light of my true identity. The deeper I leaned into this process, the more I discovered that labels are not facts, they are opinions. They are reflections of what other people saw in you at one moment in time, but they do not define the vastness of who you are capable of becoming. The world loves labels because labels make people easier to control. If you're the dependable one, they know they can rely on you without question. If you're the troublemaker, they know they can dismiss you without listening. If you're the failure, they know they can underestimate you without guilt. But when you create distance from these labels, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. My journey of shedding labels was not about proving others wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could be more than dependable, more than available, more than what I had been told I was. I began to explore new passions, take risks I once avoided, and present myself in ways that shocked people who thought they knew me. And the beauty of it was this: the further I stepped away from those labels, the closer I came to the truth of who I really was. If there's one lesson my story has taught me, it is this: your life will never truly change until you stop living in the costume of someone else's definition. You must create distance from those old labels, because until you do, you will always be playing a character in a script you did not write. And when you finally break free, when you finally claim your own name, your own identity, and your own truth, you will discover the sweetest freedom there is. The freedom to simply be yourself, unshackled, unlabeled, and unapologetically alive. Number 4, detox your environment. There is a truth we often overlook. Transformation is not only about changing yourself, but about changing what surrounds you. Because no matter how strong your willpower is, if you are constantly breathing in toxic air, you cannot expect to stay healthy. The same applies to your mind, your spirit, your dreams. Your environment shapes you more than you realize. I learned this lesson the hard way. For years, I stayed in circles that drained me, surrounded by people who laughed at big dreams, who spoke more about others than about ideas, who normalized mediocrity and disguised it as realism. At first, I thought I could rise above it. I told myself, I'll be different. I won't let their negativity sink into me. But slowly, without noticing, I began to mirror them. My language changed. My energy dropped. My vision blurred. I found myself shrinking my dreams, hiding my ambitions, and settling for less, because the environment around me rewarded conformity and punished growth. The wake-up call came one night when I left a gathering of so-called friends and realized I felt worse about myself than when I had arrived. They hadn't physically harmed me, but every sarcastic comment, every dismissive laugh, every subtle reminder to be realistic had chipped away at my spirit. Walking home, I asked myself, why am I allowing myself to be poisoned in slow doses? That was the night I decided to detox my environment. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront anyone. I simply began to step back, little by little, creating space between myself and the negativity that had disguised itself as friendship. At first it was lonely. Silence replaced the constant chatter. Free time replaced endless obligations. But in that emptiness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. I started filling my space with new voices. Audiobooks from people who inspired me. Videos that challenged me to grow. Long walks in nature, where the only voices I heard were the wind and my own thoughts. And slowly I felt the detox working. My energy returned. My ambitions reignited. My sense of self strengthened. People noticed the shift. Some were offended, accusing me of thinking I was too good for them. But what they didn't understand is that detoxing your environment is not about arrogance. It is about survival. You cannot plant roses in a garden full of weeds and expect them to bloom. You must clear the soil. You must protect the roots. And you must be ruthless about what you allow to stay. The more I distanced myself from toxic spaces, the more room I had to create empowering ones. I sought out mentors who believed in growth. I connected with people who celebrated ambition, and I built routines that nourished my body and mind. Looking back, I realized that detoxing my environment was not just a step in my transformation, it was the foundation of. Because here is the truth. No matter how much you want to grow, if you are constantly surrounded by negativity, you will eventually absorb it. You don't rise to the level of your dreams, you fall to the level of your environment. And the bravest, most transformative decision you will ever make is to choose the soil in which you plant yourself. My story is proof. Once I let go of the spaces and people that dimmed my light, I discovered just how brightly I was capable of shining. And so will you once you gather the courage to detox your environment, to cut away the noise, to protect your vision like it's sacred, because it is. Your dreams are fragile in the beginning, and they need clean air, nourishing soil, and a healthy environment to grow. Don't let the toxins of negativity suffocate them. Choose your environment with the same care you would choose the air you breathe. Because when you change what surrounds you, you change what grows within you. Number 5. Rebuild in the dark. The most powerful transformations rarely happen under the spotlight. They happen in the shadows, in the quiet hours when no one is watching, in the seasons where it feels like the world has forgotten you. We live in a culture obsessed with visibility. Everyone wants to show their progress, display their wins, prove they're growing. But the truth is, real rebuilding requires darkness, silence, and patience. I know this because I lived through a season where I had to disappear completely in order to find myself again. After years of giving too much, saying yes to everyone, and wearing labels that weren't mine, I reached a breaking point where I felt empty, like I had nothing left to give. Outwardly, people thought I was fine. I still smiled, I still showed up, but inwardly, I was crumbling. I remember one weekend in particular, when I turned off my phone, closed my blinds, and sat in my room with nothing but a notebook and a heavy silence. At first it felt unbearable. The stillness made me restless. The lack of validation made me insecure, and the absence of distractions forced me to confront the truth. I had been living on autopilot, and I had no idea who I really was beneath the roles I had been playing. That was the beginning of my rebuilding. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I simply disappeared into my own shadows and began the work. Every day, I wrote down my rawest thoughts, peeling back the layers of who I had pretended to be. I asked myself hard questions. What do I want? What do I fear? What am I willing to lower in order to win myself back? And slowly, the answers came, not in dramatic revelations, but in whispers, in small sparks of clarity that grew brighter with time. Rebuilding in the dark also meant discipline. I started new habits that no one saw, waking up earlier to meditate, exercising when no one was around to applaud, reading books that challenged my perspective instead of scrolling through endless noise. There were no likes, no claps, no applause, just me, the darkness, and the slow, steady work of becoming someone new. And that's when I learned something profound. Darkness is not punishment. It is preparation. Just as a seed must be buried before it can break open, I had to bury myself in silence before I could grow. And just like a seed, the process was invisible to the outside world. No one clapped when I chose to heal, instead of hustle. No one congratulated me for journaling my pain, instead of hiding it. No one celebrated when I said no to toxic environments. But slowly, quietly, the rebuilding was happening. Months later, when I began to step back into the world, people noticed a difference. They couldn't explain it, but they felt it. My presence was calmer. My energy was sharper. My boundaries were stronger. They asked me what had changed, and my answer was simple. I rebuilt in the dark. The truth is, if you try to rebuild under the spotlight, you'll be tempted to perform instead of transform. You'll cater to opinions instead of authenticity. You'll chase approval instead of healing. But when you rebuild in the dark, there is no one to impress, no one to perform for. You face only yourself. And that is where true transformation begins. My story taught me that the darkness is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It is the cocoon where the caterpillar dissolves into nothing before becoming a butterfly. It is the night that prepares the dawn. It is the sacred hidden space where the broken pieces of your life are rearranged into a stronger whole. So if you find yourself in a season of invisibility, where no one sees your effort, where no one celebrates your growth, don't despair. That is the most fertile ground for transformation. Trust the dark, rebuild quietly, and when the time is right, you will emerge, not as the person you once were, but as someone entirely new, someone unrecognizable to your old limitations, someone who carries the strength of silence within them. Because the world may admire the butterfly, but the real miracle always happens in the cocoon. Number 6. Return with reinvention. There is a sacred moment in every transformation journey, a moment when you step out of the shadows and into the light again, not as the same version of yourself that left, but as someone entirely new, someone who carries the weight of silence, the lessons of darkness, and the strength of survival in their very presence. This is the moment of return, the moment when reinvention speaks louder than explanation, when people see you but no longer recognize you, not because you've become someone else, but because you finally become who you were meant to be. I remember vividly the first time I returned after my season of withdrawal and rebuilding. For months, I had disappeared into my cocoon of silence, working in the dark, healing wounds no one else could see, breaking habits that had held me captive for years. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing. There were no announcements, no updates, no cries for attention, just quiet, private transformation. And then one day, I walked back into a gathering of people who once knew me well, people who were used to the old me, the one who was always available, always agreeable, always carrying the weight of others at the expense of myself. But when I entered that room, I saw it in their faces. Before anyone spoke, they sensed it. Something was different. My posture was stronger, my energy quieter but sharper, my presence calmer yet more powerful. Some people smiled with genuine warmth, but others looked unsettled, even uncomfortable, because they could no longer read me, no longer box me into the old roles they had once controlled. And that's when I realized something profound. Reinvention doesn't require an announcement. It reveals itself in silence. You don't need to tell people you've changed. They will feel it. They will hear it in the tone of your voice. When you say no without apology, they will see it in your eyes. When you no longer seek approval, they will notice it in your choices. When you protect your energy instead of wasting it. Reinvention is the art of returning not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. To show up as the person you built in the dark. In my case, Reinvention wasn't about wearing new clothes or speaking new words. It was about embodying a new standard. I stopped laughing at jokes that disrespected my values. I stopped saying yes to invitations that pulled me away from my purpose. I started carrying myself with an energy that said, I know who I am now, and I won't shrink for anyone. And while some people couldn't handle it, others were inspired, even drawn closer, not because I sought their approval, but because authenticity has a power that imitation never will. Reinvention is also about release, understanding that not everyone from your past is meant to walk with you into your future. When I returned, I discovered that some connections naturally faded away, not because of bitterness, but because we were no longer aligned. At first, it hurt to let go of people I had known for years, but I reminded myself that reinvention requires pruning, removing what no longer serves your growth, so you can make room for what does. And as I embraced this, new opportunities, new relationships, and new visions began to open up before me. Things I could never have received if I had remained the old version of myself. My story taught me that returning with reinvention is not about proving your transformation with words. It's about living it with quiet confidence. It's about letting your presence, your discipline, and your choices speak louder than any declaration. When you return, don't return for applause. Don't return for validation. Don't return to convince anyone. Return because you are ready. Return because you are whole. Return because the world needs to meet the version of you that the dark, the silence, and the solitude create. And remember this, people may doubt your words, but they cannot deny your presence. So when you return, let your reinvention be undeniable, because the most powerful thing you can ever do is walk back into the world as living proof that disappearing does not mean you were defeated. It means you were reborn. Number 7. Stay mysterious, stay powerful. One of the greatest lessons I learned after disappearing and transforming myself is that not everyone deserves to know your every move, your every thought, or your every plan, because mystery is not weakness, it is power. We live in a world where people are addicted to oversharing, where validation comes from broadcasting every step, every success, every wound for the world to see. And yet the more we expose, the more we invite opinions, resistance, jealousy, and even sabotage. The truth is, what people cannot see, they cannot control, and what they cannot predict, they cannot destroy. I discovered this lesson during a time in my life when I was rebuilding in silence and slowly stepping back into the world. I had always been the type of person who shared too much, who explained every decision, who gave everyone access to my journey because I thought it was a way of staying connected. But all it did was leave me open, vulnerable, and constantly drained by the weight of opinions I never asked for. Every time I announced a new plan, someone found a way to criticize it. Every time I opened up about a dream, someone found a way to minimize it. And worst of all, every time I revealed my struggles, there were those who used them against me later. One day I caught myself venting to a group of people I thought cared about me, and instead of support I saw smirks, dismissive shrugs, and thinly veiled envy. Walking home that evening, I felt exposed, foolish, like I had handed my heart to people who only wanted to dissect it. That was the day I made a vow to myself: from this point on, I will live in a way that leaves room for mystery. Not because I'm hiding, but because I'm protecting. From then on, I began to move differently. I stopped announcing my goals before I achieved. I stopped explaining my boundaries when people crossed them. I stopped updating people on every detail of my process. And you know what happened? My power grew. People became curious, unsettled even, because they could no longer predict my next step. Some would ask, "What are you working on these days?" And I would smile and say, "You'll see." That one phrase became my shield, my reminder that not everyone is entitled to a front row seat to my evolution. And the more mysterious I became, the more peaceful I felt, because mystery creates space for growth without interference. It gives you the freedom to fail privately, to experiment without pressure, to rise without the noise of other people's expectations pulling at you. My reinvention began to accelerate when I stayed mysterious, because I no longer wasted energy defending my process. I poured all that energy into becoming. And here's the most beautiful part. When I finally revealed the results of my silence, when I returned with achievements, strength and clarity that no one expected, the impact was 10 times greater than if I had narrated every step along the way. That's the hidden gift of mystery. It magnifies your presence, because it carries with it an aura of unpredictability and strength. Some people will misunderstand it. They'll accuse you of being secretive, distant or arrogant. But what they don't realize is that staying mysterious is not about shutting people out. It's about choosing who deserves access and who doesn't. In my own journey, I discovered that the people who truly cared about me didn't need constant updates to feel connected. They trusted me, they supported me quietly, and they celebrated me without needing every detail. The rest, the ones who demanded explanations, who pried, who grew resentful when I pulled back, revealed themselves as people who were never rooting for me in the first place. So my message is this: never underestimate the power of mystery. Guard your dreams like precious seed. Protect your process like sacred ground. Share only with those who have earned the right to hear your truth, and let the rest wander. Because mystery is not isolation, it is insulation, a way of keeping your growth safe from the claws of doubt, envy, and control. And when you finally emerge, when the results of your hidden work shine through, the world will be forced to respect what they could not predict. Stay mysterious, stay powerful, and never apologize for keeping your evolution sacred. For in a world that constantly demands access, the greatest strength you can carry is the courage to remain untouchable, unexplainable, and unforgettable. At the end of the day, disappearing is not about running away. It is about stepping back from the noise, reclaiming your power, and building yourself in silence until the world can no longer recognize the version of you that once struggled to survive. Transformation is not a single event, but a process of shedding what no longer serves you, guarding your energy, and rising from the shadows with a strength that cannot be denied. Remember this: you do not owe the world constant access, constant updates, or constant explanation. What you owe yourself is the chance to grow unbothered, to fail privately, and to rise powerfully. When you embrace disappearance, you discover that solitude is not loneliness, but the birthplace of clarity. And when you finally return, stronger, sharper, and unshakable, you will no longer beg for respect. You will command it by the weight of your presence. So take the courage to step back, to guard your mystery, and to honor your evolution. Disappear when you must, transform as you will, and when you re-emerge, let the world see not the person you were, but the person you chose to become.